Okay, we're going to continue in Masachet Chagiga. We are in Daf Chaf Amud Aleph. We're about 10 lines from the top, and we're continuing to deal with the sugyas, the topics of Tuma v'Tahara. Now, the Chachamim put in a halacha that for people who are extra strict with the laws of Tuma v'Tahara, the Pirushim, they're the ones who eat their chulin food in purity, that tar objects are considered to retain their state of tahara only as long as they are consciously and uninterruptedly guarded from contact with tuma. So Chachamim said that these perushim who want to keep their stuff tahor, they have to consciously and uninterruptedly, im kavanah, with their libo, they put it in their heart to make sure it stays away from tuma. Should they be subject to hesed hadat, diversion of attention, right? They're not paying attention by the person in possession of them, even for a moment, they become tameh. Even though the person has no specific knowledge of their having come in contact with a contaminant, they become tameh. Okay, this is the way Rashi explains the sugya over here. So here are a few halachot now that we want to attribute to hesed hadat, that the parush is having these items and they become tameh because he doesn't pay attention to it well. Okay, here. Amar Rabbi Yonatan ben Elazar, nafla ma'afarto hemenu. And so this chaver, this parush, this good guy who keeps extra strict halachot, his shawl, so his sweater, his jacket, his talit, it falls from him. And Amar Haveron, he tells his friend, Tenali, give it to me. Tanalo, and he gives it to him. Teme'ah. This shawl, this cloak, this jacket, this talit is now going to be tameh. What's the reasoning? Where is the hesach? Number one, his friend doesn't know, even though he's also a parush, he's also a chaver, it's everything with tahara. But his friend doesn't think that this guy was holding this betahara. Why? Because when he asked me to pick it up, the friend says, you didn't ask me if I was tahara. And the Balim, the guy who it belongs to, he cannot keep it in his mind kavanah to keep it tar. Why? We have another principle, hazakah. There's a hazakah. En adam mishamer mashibiyat havero. You cannot have kavanah, I'm keeping this tar, if it's in someone else's hand. You don't have jurisdiction over it, so to speak. Okay? So that's one case where you have hesed hadat, and the item becomes not pure. The next case, says the Gemara, Amram Yonatan ben Amram, nithalfu lo kelim shel Shabbat v'kelim shel Hol. The guy wanted to um put on weekday clothing, and he ended up taking Shabbat clothing, and he put on the Shabbat clothing, and his mind is on the weekday clothing, uvashon, and he wore them even for Zman Mu'at, a small amount of time. Behakpeda. And he was thinking that he's going to keep them tar, but his mind was on the weekday clothing and he was wearing the Shabbat clothing. Nitme'u. Okay? The clothing becomes tameh. Right now, the Gemara's assumption is because he had his mind on one and it was on the other. And so the kavanah to keep it tar doesn't exist because you have it on the wrong thing. Okay. And the next case, Amr bi Lazar bar Tzadok, Maaseh b'shtei nashim haverot. There's a story by two ladies who are haverot. There are the wives of Chaverim, of Talmidei Chachamim, who eating their foods b'tahara, their perushim. And what happened? Shenihalfu lahen kelehen bebet hamilchat. Okay, so these two ladies, they went to the bathhouse, and sometimes it happens. Clothing gets mixed up, and each one ended up putting on each other's clothing. So the other one's clothing. So now they have kavanah for their clothing. And meanwhile, they find out that they're not wearing their clothing, they're wearing the other person's clothing. So their kavanah is not on the right spot, and therefore it becomes tameh, said Rabbi Akiva. Okay, now, these last two cases were basically where the person had kavanah on one item, and it was mistaken for that what that item was. He's having kavanah for the clothing he's wearing, but it's Shabbos clothing. It's not weekday clothing like he thought. Or she's wearing the clothing, having kavanah to keep it tahar, but it's not her clothing. And there we said they become taveh. So now the Gemara is going to ask on this. Matkif la Rabbi Oshaya. Rabbi Oshaya objected. He said, El Ma'ata, but if so, we have Hoshit Yado Lasal Lito Pachitim. If a guy has a basket of different types of bread, and he goes into with his mind, I'm going to pull out wheat bread. Okay? And he ends up picking up barley bread. Hachinami dinitma'eh. Are you going to say that it's going to become tameh? The guy wanted to go for one bread, and he ended up pulling up a different bread. Are you going to say this is going to come tameh? Because if you do such a thing, then what would the person have? You'll never have tahara because it's simple. It's always like this. People go for one food, they take something else. So what's it called? Cannot be. Logically, cannot be that. And if you say no, it's true that if you meant to take a wheat bread and then you took a barley bread instead, it's going to become tameh. Because I didn't have kavan on it. V'hatanya was taught in the Braytom. Hamshamer et techavit b'cheska shel yain. Person was guarding the barrel on the presumption that it was wine. V'nimtza et shel shemen. And it turns out it's of oil. Tehora militameh. It is tahor, and it cannot make something else tameh. So what do you see? That even though he had kavanah for watching wine and ended up being oil, it is tahor, and it cannot make something else tameh. Now, Martin says, if it's true that I'm watching it and it stays tahor, ul tameh, and according to your opinion, according to your reasoning, look at the end of that brayta. Because the brayta says, yes, it cannot make something else tameh, but asura milecho. But you're not allowed to eat it. If it's tar, why are you not allowed to eat it? Am I? Why should that be? I'm gonna be Yirmiyah. You have to know what this case is. But I mentioned mighty midavar hamitameya. Veloy midavar hapisol. Okay. So what's this case? So what was challenging of this case? This case challenge was, we said, even though I thought I was watching wine and turned out to be watching oil, it stays tar and it can't make something else from it. So I do see if I mix it up, right? I'm thinking it's one thing, and it's the actual other thing. The watching works, but if the watching works, why does it say you can't eat it? Mars, I'll tell you why you can't eat it. Because when he watched it, he's telling you, I watched it. Shouldn't become a level of tumah that can make something else tameh. But I did not watch it from a level of tumah that makes it tameh, but it cannot make something else tameh. Meaning, the tameh or pasul, right? We said last time, tameh means I can make something else tameh. Right? Mitameh something else, and pasul means it cannot make anything else more, but it becomes tameh itself. So he says, I watched it, and it shouldn't become a level where it can make something else, but I didn't watch it that it could become tameh itself, and therefore it cannot make something else tameh. But it could become tameh itself. That's why you can't eat it. But still, you see from here, if I mix up wine oil, it still works. Now, the Gemara's question at this point is, can it be that a person is a watcher to keep something tar to a limited extent? Right? I'm only watching it, so it shouldn't become the level of tumah that can make something else tameh. But for it to become tameh itself, that I'm not watching. It's such a thing that you can have half a shmirah. Umi ikam. Nitiruto lepalga. Can it be you have a partial guarding? And the Gemara says, "Ain, yes." V'hatanya, we're on 28 too. V'hatanya, oishit yodoi basal. V'hasal aketifo, v'magrefa b'toich hasal, v'yabadi bo al hasal, v'lo yabadi bo al magrefa. Hasal tor, v'magrefa tamei. This is the case. The guy has a basket full of figs, and he has in there a shovel. He puts his hand inside the basket. Kavanah for the basket and kavanah for the figs to stay tahor. But he doesn't have kavanah to keep the shovel tahor. So what happens? The basket and its contents inside are tahor. V'hamagrefa teme'ah. You see in this case that where he had kavanah, it works, and where he didn't have kavanah, it didn't work. So you have half and half. The Gemara says hasal tahor titameh hamagrefa l'sal. Let the magrefa, let the shovel that's in contact with the basket, make the basket also tameh. The Gemara says, "Ein keli mitama keli." The only time a keli can make another keli tameh if it's an avhatuma. If it's anything less than avhatuma, it cannot make another keli tameh. So this shovel doesn't get an avhatuma status. The shovel gets the status of a lower one. So therefore, it cannot make the basket. Oh, if we cannot make the basket, Vilitame mashe basal, let it be mitame the figs that are inside. Okay? Let it be mitame the figs. That makes sense. Ravina be'oimer shemartiv midover shemitame o v'loi midover haposlo. All right? When I watched it that it should become tame. Meaning, he's saying like this. When I put my hand in the basket, I was making sure I kept the basket tar, the figs tar, and for the shovel, I kept it tar to the extent that it cannot make something else tar. That was my kavanah. But to make it possible itself, that I didn't have kavanah for. Therefore, the shovel becomes possible to the extent that it becomes tummy, it cannot make something else tummy. And the other thing is all stay tar because it depends on his kavanah. And we see from here that kavanah could be split up. You can split up a kavanah. You call makom. In the end of the day, the kasha still exists. What is the question? We have the two cases. We have the case of Rabbi Yonatan ben Amram and Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok. Let's review the two cases. The case one was that the guy had kavanah to put on his weekday clothing and accidentally took out the Shabbat clothing. His mind was to keep the weekday clothing tahar. He's wearing the Shabbat clothing. It becomes tameh because his mind wasn't correct, right? He mixed it up. That's what we were thinking. The second case was the two ladies went to the bathhouse and they mixed up their clothing. And each one's clothing now, Rabbi Akiva said, was tameh, even though they had kavanah to keep it tar. But since it was the other person's clothing, it becomes today. Again, because we thought it was a switch up. But now we see from this case that the guy was thinking he was watching wine and actually was oil. We said he could keep it tar. So we see a mix-up doesn't make something not be tar. So what's with these two cases? The oil. Okay. And furthermore, another question. Motiv Rabba bar Avua. They asked the question from Rabba bar Avua. Right? Ma'aseh b'ishahat. With a woman, story went like this. She bought to the Rabbi Ishmael. She comes in front of Rabbi Ishmael. She tells Rabbi Ishmael, Rabbi, beged zeh araktiv b'tahara. I know for a fact that when I made this clothing, I did it b'tahara. But I didn't have any kavanah, and I wasn't paying attention that it should be tahara. But I know the result is that it was done in tahara. It was done in purity. Right? So a beged less than 3 by 3 fingers cannot be mikabel tuma. It cannot accept tuma. Once it becomes more than 3 and 3, it could accept tuma. So she's saying, when I made it, I know for a fact that the result was that it was never mitame. Even though I didn't pay attention to it, can it be considered a tahor? Okay, so mitoich b'dikosh shayir b'Ishmael potka. Ishmael was asking your questions. What about this time, that time, this time, that time? Amar Allah. All of a sudden, it came out Nida moshcha imi that a Nida was helping her with the rope. Okay, and maybe she did the tumah moving it, hesed, right, indirectly moving it, and now it becomes tumah. So even so, here she is saying, "I know for a fact that it's tar because even though I didn't pay attention, it's tar." And Rabbi Akiva asked questions, and Rabbi Shmuel asked questions, and Rabbi Shmuel says, I'm Rabbi Shmuel. How great are the words of the rabbis? Shahayu Omrim, they said, Bilibo Lishmoro Tahor, and Bilimo Lishmoro Tameh. You paid attention to keep it tahor, it's going to be tahor. If you didn't pay attention, you didn't have to come out to keep it tahor, it's going to be tameh. Don't tell me it's about a result. It has to be the process. Shuv ma'aseh b'ishachad shebat lefnei b'shmael. And Amrullah, she said to him, Rabbi, my teacher, Mapazo, Argatia b'tahara. I made this cloth impurity. But I didn't, what's it called? I didn't pay attention to it. But I know it's tar. When we talk to Kosher Rabbi Shmuel Botka, Rabbi Shmuel is asking her questions. And it comes out, Nima, Rabbi, she says, Nima nifsaka ukshatiya bapeh. When I was a needle, I used my mouth to catch one of the threads and I put my saliva there. And then the baguette turned into a 3x3 size and it was still wet. And so therefore it was Mikabel Tumor. And Rabbi Shmuel, they said, Billy boy, Lishmaroi Tahar, and Billy Molishmaro Tameh. So if you have paying attention, yes. If you don't have paying attention, then no. So number one, we see from what we hear that Rabbi Shmuel was even entertaining the thought. If you didn't pay attention, maybe it could still be tar. Turns out it can't work that way, but he was entertaining that thought. Okay, so if you're entertaining that thought, if one had in mind to guard it, it is tahor, implying that the only problem with diversion of attention is that the item but become contaminated in the interim. If so, what difference does it make? In the last two cases, the person who was guarding the object thought it was a different item, as long as he had kavanah for what he's wearing, whatever it was. Similarly, in the first case, why should the fact that the shawl fell from the person and was retrieved by somebody else render it tameh? The guy had kavanah to keep it tahor the whole time. So as long as he put his mind to it, it should be good in all these cases. So the Gemara says, all right, we got to explain these cases. They're different. חברתי אשת עם הארץ אומרת, כל אחד אומרת, חברתי אשת עם הארץ, ומתח דעתה מינה. You're right. As long as you have coming out, even if I mix up the clothing, it should still remain tahor. But what happens? Once the lady realizes that she's wearing the different person's clothing, she says, oy vey, that person is a hamaretz. So this clothing is already tameh. So she stops her kavanah from keeping it tahor because she thinks it's already amaretz's clothing, even though it's really not. But since she thinks that, the hesech hadat, and now the clothing really becomes tameh. That is that case, okay? Because they think the other one is an amaretz. But Yonatan ben Amram Nami, Kiva the Kem Shabbat Avin Lehu Shmir Tepe, Masach Date Minahu. Oh, you know the case of the guy pulled out the Shabbat clothing instead of a weekday. Why that becomes tameh? Who cares if it's a mix-up? Mix-ups work as long as kavanah is there. So what's the difference? Because people in general are more careful with their Shabbat clothing than to their weekday clothing, because now you're wearing Shabbat clothing, but you're guarding it on a weekday level, so to speak, and therefore it's not the same as guarding it on a Shabbos level. I mean, in a non-Tumah Tahara way, you would think about it when you're wearing your suit, right? You're wearing your suit. You what's it called? You make sure it's going to stay cleaner, not going to get dirty. People are not smudging. Even the kids, you're a little bit more careful with. The weekday clothing, seems to get more dirty and it's less cared about. So similarly speaking, there's more of a watch when it comes to Shabbos. So now that I mixed it up, and I'm watching it on a weekday level, but it's my Shabbos clothing and it needs more watching, and therefore it becomes tamei. But the last case, our first case, na'aved lehu shimur bidei dechavare. Let the owner continue to guard it while it is in his fellow's hands, right? Since it fell down, the other guy picked it up, but I still have kavanah the whole time. Amari bi Yohanan, like we said in the beginning, Chazakah. And Adam Mishamer Mashibiyan Haviru. There's no way you can have kavanah when someone else has that item in their hand, right? Your kavanah cannot help if the guy can go and make it tahor. You have to have it with you to keep it tahor and have the mind to keep it tahor. It's not going to work otherwise. The Gemara says, "V'loi, is it not true? It doesn't have to really be in my hand. I can still keep it tahor. Where do I know this? Vatanya. It was taught. Hareisha yuchamaravu fa'alav ti'onin taharot. This guy, he rented out a donkey moving service, and he's giving the donkey to the donkey drivers and the workers there to move his tahar barrels of wine. And the Braita says, as long as he's within a mill, as long as they're within 3,000, 4,000 feet, it remains tahar. But he says to them, "Lechu, go. I'm going to come after you." But once they are no longer visible to him, turn the corner or whatever, then right away his barrels of wine become tamei. Ma'ishno ratio, ma'ishno seifa. What if you're saying that it's in someone else's hands, it should become tamei? So the first case should also become tamei. I'm right. Yitzchak Nafcha. Yitzchak Nafcha says no. You know what the first case is? Resha b'mithaher hamarav ufa'alav lechach. Listen, the guy knew that he's going to be transporting the herdic items. So the guy who's renting them out says, all of you have to go to the mikvah. So he took the whole moving service, all the workers, all the Hispanics, all the whoever's moving it, and he put them all into the mikvah. They're all tahor now. So now if they're moving it, it's going to be tar. If so, nami. Let's say the last case also where he tells them go ahead and I'll come after. If they all went to the mikvah, it should remain tar. No, and amad it's makpid amaga habiro. You know why? Because even though you put him to the mikvah, when he sees his friend down the block, he's going to give him a hug, going to touch him, going to do this, move back, it's going to become tamei again. So therefore, it's not going to work in that second case. What? In the first case too, even though they're 3,000, 4,000 feet away from you, they still can bump into their friend. No. He knows that you want him to remain tahor. And he knows if he touches his friends, he'll become tamei. But he knows that you can show up any moment from any side, and therefore he's going to be careful. Even if he sees his friend, he's not going to give him a hug. Maybe also in the end, you can jump up on them. Maybe therefore they're not going to hug anybody else. No. Why don't you tell the guy, you go ahead, and I am going to follow up after you, right? He's going to become confident that you're not going to show, and he does whatever he wants. He's become retamei, and therefore it doesn't work. Okay, hadin lachin darshan. Just end up with one last idea based on this Gemara. The Gemara kept saying that in order to keep something tahor, you have to these people who keep chulin b'tahara have a special din. They have to have kavanah to keep everything tahor. Their mind has to be on it. So there is an interesting the Vein Cheled. He explains that these words bilibo lishmoro tahor ve'em bilibo lishmoro tamei. If you're paying attention, you keep it tahor. If you don't pay attention, it becomes tamei. Shaychim, they're also connected gam liyirat shemayim. For a person to have yirat shemayim, shim adam noten libo lihishamer mikol avam v'ashmo yitaher. If a person pays attention to stay away from all sin, then he's going to become pure. But if he doesn't pay attention, he's just living life. Even though he's not planning to sin, he does not become more purified. Person has to come to agree to it before he does it. That's what it's depending on. Stay away from all evil and tumah. Okay, so just an interesting side point that comes out of this Gemara as well. B'ezras Hashem. Next time we pick up with the new parak. Shavuot Tov.